people have monetary gain to consider in here. If we're going to do things for China, right, that we have to, their 90% of their agriculture is brought in, and they start manufacturing that themselves, then how does that cut that off here? Did we have any bad contracts on that people were paying off? Do we have to refactor the timelines? What routes in here, if simulated, because it's going to do a lot of those AIs learning how to walk and how to drive and what routes they're going to do, much like that guy there in that stone mill a second ago, is going to have to say inside of here that, we have to determine what routes are causing the most conflict of interest right here against what the Hamiltonian vote is. And when I say 80%, I'm not talking about 0 to 80% and screw the richest people, and I'm not obviously talking about birth to the first 18 years of life, because, people that are in diapers, yeah, I know, right? That these people that are children that cannot do anything would basically die, even if they were not preemie or outside the womb, would actually be able to survive on their own. And again, who's going to take care of those children? What route do we have on these situations? This is pretty heavy-duty stuff.
Super soldier.
It goes much beyond what's going on the inside of the animal's mind here about a raven paradox. Is all ravens being ravens? There's going to be some similarities between a raven and a...
If you liked your position there in the stone mill and they didn't send in Red Dawn, a Fed for secondary protocol about Armageddon and the anomaly, right? Then you would send in an ultramarine or somebody with high skills in manufacturing and labor and stuff like that to make sure. Now they're posted in your spot. That's why, kid, because they never had a home territory to do it. They were trained by the military to go down and send to an area because they were all a band and his children off at a child drop-off center. And what do we do with them children? Who's paying the taxes on them? This is a real thing about maybe not the Puritan nature of keep all the children like the church tell you to, because that's a monster from the church of them. That Salem witch trial is somebody sticking their dick in the Dairy Queen and she didn't like it, but it goes against the will of the church and some stuff. You gotta factor this valley of landmines out here.
And a parakeet, but they are different. And aeronautics, the flow, physical shape, they have some similarities, and therefore that'll FMA downrange with the right simulator. But is it simulated completely to verify the visual experiments?
No. When I say something like calculations win wars for this aspect, a Raven paradox is marginal utilitarian, Zeno's paradox, and things like that, you would say, well, obviously the government's going to have more calculations, they have more tools, more resources, and things like that. And it is fair to say that I am the minority of this demographic, but my calculation is still valid. This heat death is going to take the universe as far... Well, I can't really be sure about heat death and expansion, but I know hydrogen sunshine is going to burn out. That's going to turn into a red giant that eventually expands into Earth's orbit around it. Because of nuclear decay, because we've seen there's results in nebula and a bunch of other things. That will happen. There is no perfect. When they're talking about 5 sigma, that's, scientists trying to narrow down the calculation so that it's within these very tight approximations. My cut coefficients in the saw give me accurate timelines, and I would say I would try to gauge my results of cut coefficients and operational timelines and operational costs, and generally I factor a little bit on top of it. That doesn't mean I get to keep that little bit on top of it. That has to go back in the pot because I'm set to X. Like China and manufacturing there, some of the debts that go into that, we don't just get to keep that extra off because they're going to pop up the rising sons and daughters. That's going to cause a problem because we didn't factor the timeline correctly, because we didn't factor the cost or the sin, the sign, trigonometry inside of here to their projections.
Being the sensor, and Navy Astrology Center being the actual physical telescopes and things like that, which one come up first? Can we use...
Again, LEGO is more like OSHA team seen numbers with your turnover in that mill, and that's black hole collisions by any other standard, right? It's like you're in a collision here. You sent numbers to the office. They are your production numbers. They are your turnover numbers. They're your insurance numbers, because that'll be a problem when India does Russia's vessel insurance. But if something happens or something goes down, then nobody will want to do trust in India's insurance agency, but they're kind of locked in, and nobody's factoring that they're a super billionaire and could live 20 times over comparatively 80% of the population, starting from whatever minimum wage range is aggregated across America. You take all the states, you take all their minimum wages and all the counties and things like that. You find the mean, median, and mode, and that's going to correlate against population, right? And your earned income people against your portfolio fucking input people. But that's certainly not passive. I mean, those natures, if I work like that and it's an earned income, then time equity goes into there. But you got to watch them fearing you up like, oh, the world's going to explode, so keep putting money in the savings account. Keep working just one more day. Just one more day for us, and it'll be okay. And later on, it's not so okay. And meanwhile, you were slaving it away. It's not right or wrong. It might be time topology relative to where you're standing.
Is LEGO for other things than black holes? Well, sure. Neutron stars. Maybe if you dial it in correctly, then you would get the feeds and speeds over to CERN to actually make the collisions. And that is to say, dog training is a hadron collider situation. Are you really aware of that? Do you understand? Or maybe you should take that in consideration. Hell, some of you house mouse stoners growing your pot plant and your 4x4 with bunky ass buds and yellow leaves and a bunch of everything on it. You understand that that's a cause and effect, right? Maybe not the total sum, but the more that you can reduce from the calculation, the better your product is. The better you would be with nutrient solution, agriculture, substrate solution, so therefore nesting, or subnets in computers, or subframes. It also has to do with the cycle.
So I'm clear with that. It is to say that the same processes you use to grow corn or wheat or anything else, you have square footage in a field or heads of wheat in a field, it's going to correlate to heads of corn in a field, but they are two different plants. They have supersymmetry in the way they need soil or some substrate. For aeroponics is a substrate, but also the nutrient solution and water table and light cone stuff, how much light they need, how much season, how much time they have. They may be vastly different from one another, but they're the same mechanism. By sector analysis, by understanding the limits is a sector analysis, and then inputting values to them is the answer, and Z would be the result, whether it's corn, wheat, people, dogs.
Psychology of the plant. Now that's not just a
Well, if you think about eating an octopus, it's like there's a whole bunch more of us, and it's not the fact that the octopus doesn't vote, but there is a reality in rabbit hunting, at least, that, or deer tags and things like that. If we don't hunt deers, there's a lot of accidents on the highway in certain rural areas. And I know people in the city may not fully understand this, but that's why we want to hand out certain numbers of deer tags during the season to reduce a semi flipping over and losing its cargo, the cleanup time that goes with that we can reduce. It's one of those things, like if you've done something right, it's like you did nothing at all. But if you didn't do it right, then you'll have a collapse in population. If you didn't add a hidden variable theory to it, like if I'm not real careful with too many deers, they'll start to develop waste disease and things like that. And so you don't always want to hand out more tags for that, but you might have to this time. What are the calculations telling us, electron or anti-electron? What is up in the calculation? Does it have charm? To that charm, is there a flavor to it? You're saying that the guy in the stone mill is working well. Well, not only is he working well, but there's also the field in which he's working well. A manager, a ground guy, an operator. And in that way, you could say that it's CERN. Fermilab.
Necessarily is a plant conscious listening to death metal or something like that, but it's an environment you like to be in more, so therefore you would be more observant. This is to say naturally in the system or the world that an And again, I recommend read this book. It'll tell you a bunch of case studies on a guy that had a dog and went on a family trip to a vacation, had to put the dog in the kennel, and then the dog died at that kennel, and you